So, today we're going to talk a little bit about rising global tensions. Guess what? They're rising a lot. Things are getting hot all over the world, hotter. We're going to talk maybe a little bit about George Soros. We'll talk about speeding tickets. We're going to talk about the Kamala interview on CBS, where CBS edited it shamelessly. And we'll talk a little bit about Hurricane Helene, too. So first, rising global tensions. You know, we live in an extraordinary time. Now, the thing is, I remember in the 90s when I was in college, which is pretty crazy for me to conceptualize at this point that happened that long ago. I think there's definitely a point when one starts getting older and you're just like, oh my gosh, it was that long ago. I was in college. Anyway, I remember thinking to myself, you know, as a young political science student, you know, I really want something more interesting to happen. It's like we didn't have, you know, we don't have any wars. There's no real social discontent in the country. You know, there are no protests going on. You know, and I grew up on, you know, learning, you know, hearing about the 1960s and Vietnam, and I still remembered, you know, what the Cold War was like when I was a kid. You know, but I remember going, man, things are kind of boring. And, you know, it's funny because I was listening to a song by Radiohead off of the album The Bends, which I believe is their second album. Anyway, there's a line in one of the songs that's like, I wish it was the 60s. I wish that something would happen, you know, and so at the time, I mean, that sort of reflected myself. Man, how stupid was I? Because you know what? Something did happen. September 11th happened, and things have been weird ever since. And it's nearly a quarter of a century since that happened. I mean, it's just been one weird thing after another. You know, September 11th happened, then, you know, a large portion of this country abandoned the principles of the Constitution, the Patriot Act, which a lot of people, including, you know, yours truly, thinks was a significant, and that was not a good move for the Republic. You know, then we have the crash of 2008, which, you know, hit my family acutely. Sometimes I feel like I still feel it. You know, COVID. I mean, there are a million things. Anyway, now we're staring at a potential, you know, broad war on a global scale. And I know that sounds crazy to say, but it is, at this point, it's fair to say. You know, we have some clearly defined fronts. Now, we would call these hotspots in the past, but really they're more than hotspots at this point. Ukraine is kind of a front. Israel is kind of a front. The Sahel, which is south of the Sahara Desert in Africa, stretching from Mauritania all the way to Ethiopia, is kind of a front. And then there's the Taiwan Strait, which looms in the background of everything, which, you know, on Monday, the Chinese did this drill where they essentially showed how they will blockade, you know, Taiwan. They launched it the first thing in the morning, first light in the morning. They didn't announce it, and it, you know, I'm sure some people in Taipei were like, "Is this the real thing, or is this just a drill?" And it turned out to be just a drill. But what the Chinese are doing is they're figuring out what works, what doesn't work, what breaks, what doesn't break. Because one day down the road, you know, they're going to move on Taiwan, probably. Now, then there are all these other little things that are popping up all over the place. Like, for instance, the fact that we sent F-35 Joint Strike Fighters to Finland for the first time ever, where we landed them on the highway there, like right near the Russian border. Okay, that's you know, one of these anecdotal sort of pinpoints of you know, global heat. Another one is, and this is very interesting. This is right in my backyard. I grew up in Virginia Beach, Hampton Roads, which are a little bundle of cities, Norfolk being the main city, but it's Norfolk, Newport News, Hampton, Chesapeake, Virginia Beach, Portsmouth, Suffolk. This area, this little port is very, very, it has the largest Navy base in the world and has a bunch of other Navy bases and Army bases and Air Force base. And apparently there have been drones flying over these bases, and they have been able to combat them. And there was a general, I believe, or a flag officer I believe this is a Navy base. I think they said it was a general, but or maybe anyway, whatever. Senior officer. Apparently, they saw these drones flying in over bases in Virginia Beach, but they also have seen drones flying in over Langley, which is where the F-22 is based. That's crazy. Like, when I was a kid growing up, like, I didn't hear about that. Additionally, up in Michigan, apparently there were 5 University of Michigan grads, Chinese extraction, and Chinese nationals, as they say, who decided to take a little trip off into Michigan, start taking pictures of a military base up there. They just charged all those people with I don't know if it's espionage or what, but something along those lines. Anyway, those sorts of things are happening. It's like, so you got that stuff kind of simmering below the surface. Not to mention you have the Chinese Salt Typhoon, which is a hacker group a state-sponsored hacker group that apparently has been attacking our infrastructure. And I don't know if you noticed, but it seems like every 2 or 3 weeks or so, some bank or something major, like infrastructure-wise, will go offline for like a day or something. Everybody will freak out. Like the most recent one that I remember is Bank of America. Something went wrong and everybody's like, oh, well, somebody, some IT person did something wrong somewhere and this was just, a failure, and maybe it was, okay? But it seems like a lot of these, these failures or whatever are very, happen to very interesting pieces of the American infrastructure. I believe there was a hack on part of the water treatment system in the Northeast here, over the past few weeks. That they do think was clearly is people hacking into it, and I think the implication, or it was insinuated that it was state sponsored. So there's that sort of stuff. So there's all that stuff simmering under there, and like how the Chinese are kind of like testing Taiwan. So the Chinese are setting up jets and stuff, and they're testing the Taiwanese defenses. They see what the Taiwanese do. They get the Taiwanese have to scramble their jets to counter their jets. They see how it works. And they're essentially assessing things. Well, one could argue that if one was preparing for a significant, effort against this country, one would want to, essentially, know what areas work and what areas don't as much as possible before any particular conflict. Okay, now, I don't mean to play this up like, it's a done deal or like this is absolutely going to happen or anything like that. Who knows? Okay, I'm just saying. It just seems like things are getting hot broadly, and those hot spots are turning into fronts, and they seem like they're kind of bleeding together. And the fact that it does feel like, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, are kind of amalgamating their forces in some ways, at least in a loose way. The Chinese and the Russians just had this major drill together across 5 major bodies of water in their Air Force and Navy. And the fact that apparently there's a report from the South Koreans saying that there are North Korean troops now fighting with the Russians in the Ukraine. That's crazy. Now counter that with the fact that France is sending troops right up next to the Ukraine, and they're going to launch this thing called Operation Dacia, Operation Dacia Spring, as I remember, where there's going to be a battalion, and they're basically training with the explicit they're gonna go to war with Russia. I mean, they haven't said that. Explicit is the wrong word, but you look at the rhetoric coming from military leadership out of France, and it's definitely Russia's the target. And the fact that the Wagner Group has given the Russians such a hard time in the Sahel, largely Francophone Africa, Macron has a bone to pick with Putin beyond just the Ukraine. And this is how these stupid things happen. It one development leads to another development, and this this country escalates this, which in turn makes another country escalate somewhere, and then there's might be some personal beef between leaders. And the next thing you know, there's a global war, and that is a massive mistake. It's not good for you. It's not good for me. Now, if you work in the military-industrial complex, okay, it might be good for you. I will give you that, because some people will make money in a massive war. But most of us, it just means death, destruction, rape, pillage, horribleness in all sorts of ways. And right now, it does feel like we're kind of hurtling towards a large-scale conflict, and that would be a massive mistake. People, Russia, China, see the United States at kind of an inflection point where it's going from the world is going from unipolar, where we dominate everything, to now a multipolar world, and they may see an opportunity to act now because we look chaotic. We, as I've said in other podcasts, right now. We look disorganized. Who's running the country, technically? I mean, Biden isn't. I guess his team is or whatever. But still, all right? Anyway, I think that it's, I think that I am concerned, but what's also interesting is that Americans at large are concerned. There have been multiple polls coming out here recently where anywhere between 50 and 80% of people are saying that we're on the edge of a global war. This is not a story that you hear all that often, like on the mainstream. I hate to say mainstream, on the old media, in the old media. You don't hear this coming from CBS. Now, speaking of CBS. The Kamala interview, oh my goodness gracious. So they air the original Kamala interview where the interviewer asks her, what's the deal with, Israel? Are they an ally? What are we willing to do to help alleviate Israel's problems? And Kamala answers in this ridiculous answer. I mean, and I'm not being over the top here, and I can't even do justice to what her answer is. Now, we did link to her original answer in a recent post, and I encourage you to check it out. But basically, it's she's like, well, there are lots of players in the Middle East, and Israel has done some actions that are of concern, and blah, 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 blah. And it made no sense. And so that was the original interview that apparently went out on Sunday morning. But in later versions in 60 Minutes that came out Sunday night, and then the internet versions, they cut a piece of her interview from another answer and splice it in as her answer, where she's like, Netanyahu's going to work with the United States. We are very clear in that understanding, something along these lines, very straightforward, straight ahead answer, which is not the answer. And CBS thought that was okay. And today, as far as I know, I haven't seen any apologies. I think they're still trying to sell that answer as the actual answer. I hope I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, please tell me in the comments. But that's just crazy that the arrogance of the old media at this point, that they can literally air the original version, then completely edit it with all lack of ethics. I don't think any heads are rolling over at CBS over this. Because the decision to do this probably came from the very top in CBS. And this is an interesting part of the whole media question, why they have gone so actively. They hate Trump. That's nothing new, okay? The entire establishment from the foreign policy establishment, State Department, a lot of official Washington, the big media, this is not news. Like, this has been the case since Trump decided to be a politician. But for a lot of the old media, the legacy media, they see a Kamala victory as a potential lifeline. Right now, the old media structure, like from the Washington Post, New York Times, CBS, CNN, all of it, is really kind of collapsing on itself right now. It's a mixture of reasons. AI is one of them. But a lot of it is that people are just saying enough, and then CBS does this. It just reflects the arrogance. Anyway, the senior leadership probably sees, as we said, a Kamala victory as a lifeline to the old media. They think that if Kamala gets elected, at least their position as essentially a quasi mouthpiece is probably stays. If Trump gets elected, it is possible that the media landscape could change fundamentally. And the last thing the leadership at CBS or MSNBC or CNN want is for the media landscape to shift, because they have had immense power for decades. And they don't want to give up that power. And Trump potentially could deeply undermine that power. If he is, as some people, put it, redeemed in another election, it really, the heat will be on these old media machines, which are really, outdated in a lot of respects. And they know it. Anyway, and that's one of the reasons why you see the old media generally trending one way. Although I have to say, over the past couple of weeks, as the polling has gotten worse and worse for Kamala, now that's not to say that she isn't going to win. Okay, we're certainly not saying that. And again, we make no endorsements here at all. But the polls have shown she's in serious trouble. It is amazing to me. And I'm proud that this is the case, because it means that there has been some legitimate progress. Obviously, there's been legitimate social progress in this country on the issue of race, and all sorts of things. And that's one thing that we often forget. We get wrapped up in the identity politics and all this stuff. But truly, we're legitimately a better society on those fronts, okay? And the fact that the Democrats are fighting particularly for the black male vote, that they're scared that they're losing too much of it, that they brought Obama out to scold a lot of black men, saying, and you guys, the only reason you're not supporting Kamala is because you're sexist. And a lot of people took issue to that, and rightly so. But the fact that the parties are fighting over this demographic, that's awesome. It means people are being engaged. They're not being taken for granted. And that could be a really important story in this election coming up. Things are changing in terms of party affiliation and so on. The most, I believe, and we've said this before, the most since the FDR period. What it means to be a Republican, what it means to be a Democrat it has been shifting, but it's shifting really fast right now. And that is fascinating to watch. Now, saying that, a lot of people don't want this change, okay? They don't want the change. especially in the media, because the one thing that particularly the Democratic Party, let's face it, over the past 2 decades particularly, but going back further than that, has basically owned the establishment media. There's always kind of like a nod to somebody, somebody who isn't a Democrat on a panel, but it's always like this is we know what's best, and the mainstream everyday, like the thoughtful, reasonable perspective is the one that is conjured in newsrooms of New York City and Washington, D.C., and to a lesser degree in Hollywood. And anyway, but that is changing. But that isn't. But people are still fighting it. And it is interesting that apparently George Soros, his group, or a group associated with him, is trying to take over 200 talk radio stations around the country. And apparently the FCC, excuse me, apparently the FCC has fast-tracked this effort before the election, and a lot of the Republicans are up in arms and raising issues with this. But I mean, this is a classic crony play. It's like you control the regulatory system, you own it. And then when you really need a favor, guess what? The strings are pulled, and people go, everything goes into motion. And that's exactly what's happening now. Now, the question is, it might be too little too late. They might not be able to do it. But it is interesting that Soros, who I have a great deal of respect for in terms of seeing opportunities, investment-wise, but also, like, for instance, the fact that he and his team identified district attorneys as relatively low-cost nodes of power, that if they put money into those races, they could facilitate the change that they wanted to see, which you now see in all these big cities all over the place, where it's just disasters. But that was very smart. And conservatives, libertarians, Republicans, that was a move they did not see, and it's taken them years to counter in a lot of ways. So that's what's happening right now. But anyway, the point is, I respect him, and his strategy. Even though I may not respect he and his organization in other ways for many other things. Point is, he's not dumb. And his organization is not stupid. And so if they're moving to get these 200 stations, they see value in these 200 stations. And will they get taken over by this organization? We'll see. But they're basically, the idea is to create propaganda nodes around the country. Now, this is broadcast radio. And the question is, to what degree does broadcast radio even matter so much anymore? But who knows? But apparently Soros, who, again, when he makes a move, it's wise to pay attention and look at what he's doing. He sees value there. And writing off people like Soros or Buffett because they're 150 years old has proven unwise over the last decade often. So I will say that. So FCC, for the time being, is in friendly hands as far as Soros is concerned, and they're moving now. And another type of crony capitalism made its way across my transom this week, and it's classic. Apparently, in the city of Lenox, in Georgia, there's a rule in Georgia that says that you can only get 35% of your revenue for your government, I guess your local government, from speeding tickets. Only 35%. But apparently, the city of Lenox was exceeding that 35% threshold. But instead of nailing people for speeding, when they got them for speeding, they would say they would give them a ticket for unsafe driving or whatever. Apparently, this went on for quite a while, but they just got busted. But, it's funny, because this form of really kind of small-scale crony capitalism happens everywhere. It's ubiquitous. All around the world it exists. maybe not in like Japan or Sweden or something, but like, almost everywhere else, if you're in Brazil, you better have $50 to give to the cops if you get pulled over. Same thing in Pakistan or, who knows where, Spain. It's just the way it is. But anyway, in the United States, you get a ticket and you pay off that way typically. I would not suggest giving a $50 bill to a cop. Getting pulled over, that would be unwise in the United States. Anyway, so this city is getting reprimanded for doing this. So don't drive through the city of Lenox if you can avoid it, and definitely don't speed through it. But it reminded me of a story I just heard, actually, about a guy who quit drinking because he got shaken down in a little town, probably like Lenox. Anyway, apparently this guy had gone to a party at a casino, which was out in the middle of nowhere, someplace out west or Midwest or something like this. And, anyway, he's there and he decides he's not having that much fun. So he just goes and sits at the bar, basically gets himself hammered. And he decides, time to go back and get on the bus after this party. And he walks out the wrong entranceway. And apparently he's all by himself, with the exception of the local sheriff and some security people at the casino who say that he was being, unruly or belligerent or something like this. And I believe this guy when he said that he absolutely was not. He was drunk, but he wasn't, causing problems. He just found himself isolated and drunk in this little town. And basically the sheriff said, hey, look, we got to take you in. And the guy's like, what? And sure enough, they cuffed the guy, put him in the car. They're driving along, and the guy apparently is asking the cop who's driving him. It's like, what have I done? And he's like, obfuscation from the cops. Anyway, so he actually has to spend the night in jail, and he's arraigned, I guess, the next day. And I forget exactly what it is, but anyway, the system does whatever it does, and I guess like the bailiff or something. Talks to the guy who, this at this point, the guy knows he's been completely shaken down. Yes, he was drunk, but he probably wasn't violating the law. But somebody at the court goes, look, the deal is this. There are two sources of income in this town. One is the casino and the other is this jail. You had better do what you just told the judge you're going to do, because they're going to nail you for so much more money if you don't. But anyway, that little story from Lenox made me think of that story that I heard from this guy. And I was like, yeah, that's a good reason to quit drinking, man. If you find yourself, goodness gracious. Anyway. So the last thing I want to talk about is kind of another side of a small town America, a better side. In turn, through the lens of a tragedy. So Hurricane Helene devastated, the Smoky Mountains and the Blue Ridge of North Carolina, parts of Virginia too, Tennessee. Really awful, just catastrophic stuff, as we know. And the response from FEMA has been lackluster at best. Apparently, having talked to a colleague on the ground who was in the Carolinas for business right after the hurricane, the stories of FEMA it basically being, not helpful, kind of almost hidden off of roads where people couldn't find them. Also, that FEMA was forcing, local volunteers and police forces and fire departments and stuff through their channels, which created bottlenecks, which in turn probably ended up killing people. Apparently those stories, at least to some degree, are true. Volunteers were turned back, and at least to some degree, some supplies were taken. Mountain City, Tennessee, I believe, there is an example of that where the local sheriff essentially took all of these goods that were volunteered for the people who were suffering and put them away. And the argument was that it was, this stuff didn't come from like FEMA approved vendors or something like this, which is really interesting. It's a weird kind of crony element to it. Because, there are these lists in the federal government that companies always want to be a part of. You want to be on the food stamp list so that you can sell your soda to poor people, with food stamps. And I would imagine if you're a power tool company or, you make rafts or parkas or something, you probably want to be on the FEMA approved list, so that your stuff gets out there. Anyway, apparently this is a thing. And so some supplies that were not FEMA approved did not find their way to the people that need to get to. To the degree that this is true, I can't say. But I do know that this, at least to some degree, has happened. And it really speaks to, these massive bureaucracies, okay? Like, there's a point at which bureaucracy just becomes just insane. It's unwieldy, to say the least. I mean, FEMA was trying to respond to a disaster that it was probably ill-equipped to respond to, frankly, okay? It barely has been able to, respond to a lot of, like Katrina, for instance. FEMA was highly criticized after that hurricane, but at least in most of the places where a hurricane hits the country, it's usually flat. So logistically speaking, okay, so you get your way through the main arteries of the roads, but you don't have mountains and stuff that you have to deal with. Well, this time they did. You had a massive disaster in the mountains, and really, the response reflected a lack of preparedness, at least as I understand it. One person made the point, and I was in the days after Helene, that he was former military, and he was like, well, why don't we have these drone guys up there, scouring the sides of the mountains looking for heat signatures? Because at the time there were people who were still stuck in trees and stuff, and it was so fresh enough that even if somebody had died, their body temperature still could be seen. So they could identify bodies. But they didn't do that, In fact, they kept volunteers from flying drones up there to identify these people, which is crazy, because, they didn't have FAA approval, and the feds want to make sure that this is their thing and that they're in control. I don't know, it just seems wrong, especially in the United States. It's, if there's anybody who knows the mountains, it's the people who live in the mountains. And anyway, as time goes on, people outside of the Carolinas, are quickly forgetting what happened with Helene. But there are many, many people, thousands of people living in tents on their land in the Smokies and along the Blue Ridge, who are desperate. There are a lot of people who were poor to begin with, but at least, they had a roof over their head. Now they don't have that. And it's starting to get cold, and it gets quite cold, in the mountains of North Carolina. It snows. So, we should keep them in our prayers and our thoughts, and, maybe think about, writing a check or something, but we got to figure out where to send it to, cause I don't know. It's like, Mayorkas talking about how FEMA ran out of money, and and then the Trump people were like, well, you spent all this money to spend, you spent all this money on resettling these illegal immigrants, and then the thing from the old media was like, no, that's not true, and the Fed said, no, that's not true, but it turns out to some degree it was true. I mean, billions of dollars was spent on that effort. And supposedly, for the folks in Western North Carolina, there was no money. I mean, that just leaves a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. Anyway, that's it for this week. Thanks for watching and listening. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe to Against Crony Capitalism. If you want to go nuts, become a paid subscriber. You get access to all kinds of cool stuff. You get a cool ebook at the end of the year, and you can meet with me. Hey, join the community. Anyway, until next time, this is Nick